Help others. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications.
My name is Joseph Shulam. Today is the 14th day of August 2024, and I'm doing another mind candy. If you go to the YouTube, to my Facebook, to Netivyah Israel webpage, to Netivyah International .org net page, you'll find many recordings that I call mind candy. What is this mind candy that I do? Quite often, at least once a week, sometimes two times a week, rarely 3 times a week. What is this mind candy? Mind candy is things that most Christians don't think about. They don't know. And I'm not talking about the average Joe Christian. I'm talking about pastors and scholars and university professors. And this evening now in Jerusalem, it's time of war. Israel is in a bind from every direction and from every corner. And this is a very serious war. It might even develop into the war of Gog and Magog if this continues the way it's developing. But I was thinking about, what do Christians think about Jews and Christianity? What do Jews think about Christianity? Well, the question is not so simple, because there's all kinds of Jews. There is Sephardic Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, blonde Jews, black Jews, red-headed Jews, tomato Jews, carrot Jews. It's all kinds of Jews. And they come from different cultures. Some come from India. Some come from China. Some come from Holland and Norway and Denmark and North Africa and South Africa and Zimbabwe and Ethiopia and Australia. Jews are one of the only nations that for thousands of years has been spread around the whole globe. And you ask yourself, God chose Abraham and his seed, which is Isaac and Jacob, the children of Israel, as his sanctified, holy possession. God gave Israel the land of Canaan. Now, I don't know why he did that. If I loved my children and I wanted to give them a nice inheritance, I would give them Switzerland. Not here. Not between the river and the sea. And I can say that for sure. Palestine has never been free and will never be free, because this land was given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their seed as an inheritance. And when you read the book of Revelation, the last chapters of the book of Revelation, you find out that Jerusalem will be restored with 12 gates and the names of 12 Jewish apostles on those gates. It's all connected with Israel, with the Jewish people. The Catholic Church and the Greek Orthodox Church or the Russian Orthodox Church work very hard for hundreds of years to cut Christians from their roots. But it doesn't work and it won't work. But tonight I want to talk to you about a subject that is kind of related to what I've said till now and kind of not. See, Christians don't know what kind of attitudes intelligent Jews have about Jesus. And they think that Jews don't think about Jesus, they don't care about Jesus, they're not interested in Jesus, and that it's almost impossible for Jews to believe in Jesus, to evangelize them, if I use normal terminology. The reason is very simple. Most of the evangelists I've met know very little of the Bible, especially what they call the Old Testament. But the roots of everything in the New Testament is from what they call the Old Testament. Everything in the New Testament is related to the law of Moses and the prophets. That's what Yeshua preached. That's what Yeshua based his mission as the Messiah upon, the words of Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Hosea and Amos. Those were the texts that the apostles had studied and preached from. But I want to bring it to the 20th century, to our own days, and share with you what some of the pronounced Jewish scholars of the New Testament said about Yeshua, about Jesus, and about Christianity. It may surprise you, but this is mind candy. I'll start with one of my teachers. I was 12 years a student. Genius in the Bible and especially in the New Testament and in Jesus. Great scholar, interesting character. A Czech Jew, born and raised in Czechoslovakia, studied under some of the great Christian leaders of early mid 20th century in Europe and then in Israel, and was one of the great scholars, Jewish scholars of the New Testament. His name is David Flusser. He, like some of the teachers that I had in the States, was not practical about anything. If you'd send him to the grocery store to buy a bottle of milk, he didn't know how to do it. He'd break in cold sweat and find somebody else to do it for him. Dr. David Flusser of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem published, with the helps of Brad Young, one of our brothers and one of his students that became a major professor in Oklahoma, in Christian University there, Oral Roberts University. After he graduated from the Hebrew University with a doctorate. So David Flusser, an Israeli scholar of early Christianity and Judaism, recognized Jesus as a significant Jewish figure and a teacher deeply connected to Jewish tradition. Flusser viewed Jesus as a devout Jew who sought to reform and purify Judaism rather than break from it. He often emphasized the moral teaching of Jesus and their roots are deeply rooted in the Torah, which means the 5 first books of the Hebrew Bible, the law, as Christians call it, the law of Moses, and the prophets, and Pharisaic Judaism. So Flusser thinks, and he was teaching, that Jesus is one of the most significant Jews that lived in this world and spread the Torah, the law of Moses, around the whole world by his apostles in the first century, and then by the faithful Christian disciples that didn't know Jesus in person, but they knew him through the text of the New Testament, the texts of the New Testament. So here we have one Jew, world famous, professor of early Christianity, that never converted to Judaism, although, no, I apologize, never converted to Christianity, although he did get immersed for the forgiveness of his sins when he was a young man, secular Jew that didn't know that much about Judaism. Long before he was a professor, he was a teenager. He did get immersed, according to him. But he never called himself a Christian. But if you said that he didn't believe in Yeshua, he would go ballistic and say, how dare you say that I don't believe in Yeshua? All my life, adult life, I've dedicated to be with Yeshua. So you never say that David Flusser doesn't believe in Yeshua. But if you say, are you a Christian? He'd say no. Why? Because nobody in the New Testament called himself a Christian. Pagans in Antioch first called the disciples of Yeshua Christians, but they never called themselves Christians. Paul never said, I'm a Christian. Peter never said, I'm a Christian. John never said, I'm a Christian. Others called them Christians. And when I ask pastors and Bible professors how many times did the word Christian appear in the New Testament, most of them don't know. They all know Acts 11:26. The disciples were first called Christians in Antioch. In Syria, Assyria. Not in Jerusalem, not in Israel. So that's Flusser. That was his life mission, to teach the Gospels of Jesus. I had the privilege of spending years both as a student and as a friend and a disciple. Traveled with him and his wife to Europe, and in Finland we had lecture tour, and Marsha and I and Hannah, his wife, and Professor Flusser had a grand time. And when I would give a lecture in some university in Europe and say something that he didn't approve of, like criticizing Christianity, he never did. He would get up and, in the middle of my lecture, in front of students and professors, in honorable settings, and walk up to below the pulpit and say, people, I want you to know I didn't teach him these things. Yep. Because I'm critical. And he was very kind person. Didn't like to criticize anybody. Not even his own students that he had to grade. I was there when he graded Brad Young's master's degree. And he flipped the pages to the middle of the book and looked at her, read, and said, how could he say that? How could he say that? But he's a good guy. It's okay. In the end, he gave him a good grade in the 90s. Another Jew that lived in Israel, and I had the privilege of hearing one of his lectures in the very, very early days of my student days at the Hebrew University, Martin Buber, one of the greatest 20th century Jewish philosophers and teachers, who wrote a book about the relationship of his relationship with Jesus and Jesus' relationship with God, and it's called the I and Thou, me and you. And Buber considered Jesus as his older brother. As his older brother, and emphasized the importance of Jesus and his teaching and his unique relationship with the Father, with God, and with the Jewish nation, and considered himself a disciple of Jesus. Not only in that book, but in correspondence that he corresponded with Gershon Shulam and some other Jewish scholars. He said, for me, Jesus is my older brother. And much more than that in his books. Another very interesting Jewish character of the 20th century, right-winger. I'd say if he was in the first century, he'd be called a zealot. Uri Zvi Greenberg, a poet, a writer, a political activist. His view of Jesus is less known by most people because he was not a theologian, he was not a religious person. He was a poet and a philosopher and a writer. So most people don't know about Uri Zvi Greenberg. But Uri Zvi Greenberg, in his poetry that he wrote on Zionist commitment and on a very important and complex relationship that must exist between Jews and Christians, because it was this bond, this relationship of Jesus, his disciples, his apostles, and the Jewish nation is a relationship that is indelible, according to Uri Zvi Greenberg. And it is one of the most powerful chapters in Jewish history. Uri Zvi Greenberg, in his poetry, considers Jesus as the ultimate symbol of what it means to be Jewish and to experience Jewish suffering, or suffering as a Jew, and the complexity of the relationship between the church and Israel. In his opinion, Uri Zvi Greenberg's opinion, the church and Israel are like Siamese twins. No matter how much the church of Christianity, of Gentile Christianity, will try to separate and alienate itself from the Jewish nation, it will never succeed. Because the Jewish nation is the marrow of the bone which is Christianity. Joseph Klausner, who lived in the same neighborhood where I was raised in Jerusalem, not far, probably 500 yards from my house. Joseph Klausner, one of the greatest Jewish scholars of the New Testament, and a great apologist for Jesus, wrote several books. One of the most famous one is Jesus of Nazareth, Joseph Klausner. And he saw Jesus as a patriot, as a nationalist, and acknowledged Jesus to be the most important moral teacher in the world, but also among the Jewish rabbis. He argued that Jesus was not the Messiah. Instead, he saw Jesus as a significant figure in Jewish history. He had profound impact on the whole world. Somebody that Judaism needs to embrace and to learn his teaching and his mission. Our first Prime Minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, was also a disciple of Jesus. I didn't know that until I learned it not from my father, who worked in Prime Minister's office, actually outside the office for the Prime Minister, but for Ben-Gurion's secretary for many, many years. Very, very wonderful and very, very great personality. That was very close to David Ben-Gurion, and he revealed to me why David Ben-Gurion changed his name from David Green to Ben-Gurion. I didn't know that. Even though I was already a graduate with degrees in Bible and New Testament and archaeology and chemistry, I didn't know why David Ben-Gurion changed his name from David Green to David Ben-Gurion. I didn't know who Ben-Gurion was until it was revealed to me by his secretary. When it was revealed, then I recognized the character. Who was in the New Testament mentioned 4 times in the Gospel of John? Ben-Gurion. Well, his full name in Hebrew, his first name is a Greek name, Nakdimon, which is pronounced by Anglo-Christians Nicodemus. His full name was Nakdimon Ben-Gurion. And he came in John chapter 3 to Jesus by night, and he apparently was a disciple of Jesus, because most Christians know about John chapter 3, that he came by night. And Jesus had this very interesting conversation with him about being born again. And Nakdimon, who was a member of the Supreme Court of Israel, of the Sanhedrin, and very wealthy, and lived not far from where I live, in Aramathaim, Arimathea, as it is pronounced by English speakers. And he was kind of a secret disciple of Yeshua, but he remained disciple all the way till after the crucifixion and after the resurrection. So that in itself is very interesting. But the reason Ben-Gurion took that name is because he, like Nicodemus, was a disciple of Jesus, but he didn't want to make it a public thing because he was prime minister and he was afraid that it would be a misleading, wrong taken information. But Ben-Gurion valued Yeshua, valued Jesus, and understood the impact of Jesus, the Jewish impact of Jesus on all of Western culture. He was not a religious person, Ben-Gurion, but he was a believer, a believing person, and understood to see the Messiah, to see Jesus as one of the most important Jews in history, that had the greatest impact on Western culture, that must not be ignored by everybody, including Jews, and viewed him as from a religious lens as prototype of the ultimate Messiah that Jews are waiting for, still waiting for. And we ought to. As disciples of Jesus, we're still waiting for his return. His first coming was not his final coming to this earth, and is not his last visit in Jerusalem. No, he's coming back. Another great Jew that didn't have as much impact as he should have had, his name is Shalom Ash, a writer and a poet. He wrote most of his books in Yiddish, translated to Hebrew and English and many, many other languages. And a believer. I had the privileges of one time when I lived in the Tel Aviv area in Bat Yam to go to a Bible study with these people. Shalom Ash in his home, right on the seashore of the Mediterranean Sea. Bill York, a Canadian missionary who had 9 children and a great man. He was a pilot in the Canadian Air Force. He was a technician of cars. He could fix. One time, he and I were supposed to go to Jerusalem, and we were both wearing suits and ties, and I couldn't start my car. I had a Fiat. Bill York took the carburetor apart, cleaned it, put it back together in half an hour, washed his hands, didn't get one drop of oil or dirt on his white shirt or his tie or his suit, and we got in the car and drove to Jerusalem together. Fantastic. He used to make sweaters with 9 children. His wife's name was Mildred. And he made the dresses for the girls on a sewing machine, knit sweaters for the children. A man of the men, a real man, and a real man of God. So Bill York, David and Joseph Wachter, 2 ultra-Orthodox Jews that were secret believers until they became public believers, because they became among the leadership of our congregation in Jerusalem, and they had great impact on anybody who met them. Basil Barrett Baxter, who was the head of the Bible department at Lipscomb, had great respect for Joseph Wachter and David, but especially Joseph. They were both survivors of the Holocaust. And Harold Hazlip, the president of Lipscomb in the past, had an interesting experience with Joseph Wachter. So Shalom Ash had this Bible study on every Thursday night in his house. We were about Alex Cohen, several Jewish believers. I was because I lived in Jerusalem, privileged to be there one time only. But Shalom Ash was a real believer, Orthodox Jew, not ultra-Orthodox, but an Orthodox Jew. But he wrote 3 very, very important books. Even in the middle of the World War II, he wrote a book called The Apostle, about the Apostle Paul. In 1943, he wrote the book The Nazarene, about Jesus. 1939, he wrote a book, Mary, in 1949. Great pieces of literature, Jewish literature about Jesus and Paul and Mary. He was so well known as a disciple of Jesus that one time when he's landed in the airport in Tel Aviv, they wouldn't let him in because they said that he converted to Christianity. But he, like me, I converted to Jesus. I didn't convert to Christianity. What is Christianity? Who can define what is Christianity? You've got more different kinds of Christianity, Christian denominations and sects, than you have species of animals in the savannas of Africa. Yeah. I don't know much about Christianity, and you don't either. You know about your church, your fellowship, your community. You've heard something about the Baptists. You've heard something about the Pentecostals. You've heard the Pentecostals have learned something about you and your church. But essentially, nobody called himself a Christian in the New Testament. Others called the disciples of Jesus Christians as a derogatory name. The first place is Acts 11:26, and then you've got Acts 26. Agrippa tells Paul, "You almost convinced me to be a Christian." But Paul never said, "I'm a Christian." 5 times says, "I'm a Jew, I'm a Hebrew, I'm an Israelite, I'm a Pharisee," in Philippians chapter 3. But he never said, "I'm a Christian." It was a derogatory term. He never said, "I'm a Christian." So Shalom Ash wrote these 3 books, very, very important books. He wrote them in Yiddish, very popular books. Jews read them all the time. This part of the 21st century is less popular than it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago. But Ash was openly a disciple of Yeshua and a student of the whole Bible, including the New Testament, and a public figure, honored greatly in the literary community of Israel. And I'm bringing you this mind candy so you know that Jews have never forgotten Yeshua, Jesus. And they never will, because he comes back to Jerusalem. Yes. You Christians, my brothers and sisters, you better love the land of Israel. Love Jerusalem. Stand with Israel. Because, as Paul says it in Philippians chapter 2, you were at one time without God, without hope, without covenants, outside of the commonwealth of Israel, without God. That's Philippians chapter 2, verses 10 through 14, 15, 16. But now, he says, through the blood of Jesus Christ, you who were far off, strangers to God, to the covenants, and to the commonwealth of Israel. Now you are far off. By the blood of Jesus, you were brought near. And all these things that you didn't have, now you have. Now, maybe you were Irish, born to Irish parents with Irish accent and Irish food and Irish music and maybe some good old Irish whiskey. But now you are a part of the family, community, commonwealth of Israel by the blood of Jesus. So in Israel there is many people like David Flusser and like Shalom Ash and like David Ben-Gurion and like Zvi Greenberg and many others who don't want to identify himself as Christians because Christian is a confusing term. Catholics are Christians. German Nazis are Christians. It's enough to be a disciple of Jesus, like Peter and Paul and John and Andrew and James, whose real name is Jacob, in every other language except English. Yep. This mind candy. Think about it. Chew on it a little bit. And remember, a lot of Jews have very special relationship with Jesus, but they don't identify themselves as Methodists or Anglicans or Catholics or Protestants, just disciples and friends with Jesus. Mind candy. God bless you all.
Help others, like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications.